Welcome everybody to Activate Her with me, Sally Goodwin, on this welcome. Good morning everybody. Welcome to Activate Her with me, Sally Goodwin, and to this Start Your Week with Sally on this beautiful, in Cape Town, beautiful, looks like it's going to be very hot Monday morning, and it is 7 on a Monday morning. On this Monday morning, it is the 12th of February 2024, and it is the 3rd of Adar 5784. The 12th of February 2024 and the 3rd of Adar 5784. So welcome this morning. Good morning, Tishka. Welcome, my friend. I still have, I'm still fighting off a bit of cold and flu. Good morning, Summer Sky. Yes, a happy Monday to you too. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful Monday today. Very hot though. Good morning, Joyful Jolene. Welcome, my friend. So I still have, I'm still fighting off the flu. I am much better. Amazing, Anisha. Welcome. So good to see you this morning. I am feeling a lot better, but still a little bit nasally, as you can probably hear, and my voice still comes and goes a little bit. So, yeah, hopefully we won't repeat the coughing of Friday, but I have strepsils in case my throat starts to go. Good morning, Special Sylvia. Lovely to see you. And I have water as well, so I'm going to try and make sure that I don't land up. Good morning, Cole, Brigitte, Chantel. Wow, okay. Yes, sometimes, as I've said many times before, good morning, Conrad. Lovely to see you, my friend. The comments go up slowly sometimes, and then suddenly a whole lot of them go up at the same time. Good morning, Heroic Hilda. Good morning, Hanley. Welcome, Hanley. Good morning, Tessa. Welcome, everybody. So good to see you all this morning. Up bright and early on a Monday morning. Oh, good morning, Jessie, my beautiful Jessie friend. Yes, so it is so good to see you all on this. Good morning, Joyful Jane. Good morning, amazing Anthea, on this beautiful Monday morning. And good morning, beautiful Brenda. Thank you. I can do this. I know I can. I'm trusting that you all had an exceptionally blessed weekend, and that those of you who went to Rose's prophetic morning on Saturday morning in Bloberg were enormously blessed. I so wanted to go, but I just couldn't. I just wasn't feeling well enough. And also, you need to be cognizant of spreading germs as well. I don't really want to spread my flu germs onto everybody. So, but I'm sure you all had an amazing time. Good morning, Special Sylvia. Welcome. Good morning. I am feeling much better, Jen. Thank you. I'm feeling much better. Just the coughing and the throat thing is still needing to go, but I'm feeling a lot better than I was, definitely, without a doubt. So and still just a little bit croaky. Good morning, magnificent Michelle. Good morning, Venetia. Welcome. I'm a little bit croaky and a little bit nasally, but apart from that, I am a lot better. So it is so good to have you all here this morning, and I am trusting. Thank you, Hilda. Thank you so much. Yes, I received that. I'm trusting that. Good morning, Fiona. Welcome, my friends. Good to see you on the live. Fabulous, Fiona. Welcome. Very good to see you. Um, I am trusting that this week will be better than last week. And yes, good morning, Helette. Welcome, my friend. So I hope that most of you crossed over into Adar on the sunset on Friday evening, that you were conscious and cognizant of the fact that we crossed over into a new Hebrew month at sunset on Friday evening. And it doesn't have to be a whole enormous thing. You need to be conscious and cognizant of it to the degree that God calls you to be. So, some people consciously sort of celebrate the crossing over or whatever. Some people just are conscious of the fact that, oh, we crossed over. It's however God calls you to be conscious of it. You can be conscious of it, but it is, we did cross over on Friday evening into the new month of Adar. And as I said on Friday, this is Adar 1. So there are two months of Adar in this Hebrew year, because it is a Hebrew leap year. And with a Hebrew leap year comes a great sense of expectation, particularly because it's the month of Adar that is repeated twice, which is the month of joy and strength. And then we spoke on Friday about how the joy of the Lord is our strength, and how that word joy actually means rejoicing. So it's not joy as in happiness, or as in some kind of thing that just needs to be inside of you. It's an actual conscious choice to rejoice no matter what your circumstances are like. And that rejoicing in the Lord is the joy, brings the joy of the Lord that gives us his strength. It's when we choose to rejoice no matter what. Good morning, jubilant Jackie. Welcome, beautiful friend. So that is what we spoke about that on Friday. And for any of you who missed Friday's live and you want to go and just catch up on the prophetic meaning of the month of Adar, the first part of that I did on Friday. Today I want to just go a little bit more in depth into the month of Adar, because it's important for the times that we're living in, and it is important for where we are and who we are, and because we have 2 months of Adar. Remember I said on Friday that it's a double portion. So we're in this pregnant year, this Hebrew leap year that coincides for once with our Gregorian calendar leap year, and the Jewish people call it a pregnant year, and it comes with, so, and it's a double, because we have these 2 months of Adar. We have just the double portion of what Adar brings. And so I wanted to just go a little bit more in depth into the meanings of the month of Adar. And I want to remind you as well, once again, that we, being who we are, being the human beings that we are, and because we no longer live according to the stars in the sky, we don't follow necessarily the calendar according to suns and moons and constellations and things like that. We don't do that anymore, because now we have technology. We have clocks and watches. Good morning, amazing Everin. We have clocks and watches and calendars, and days and dates and times have been sort of set in stone in a way that they weren't particularly in ancient times. It was very much according to this constellations, and the Israelites would wait for the moon to show before they crossed over into the new month. And if that took a bit longer or something, then they would just wait for that to happen. Whereas we don't work like that anymore. So we very much have this fixed idea of time, and this fixed idea of of days and months and years. And so we tend to, in our human brain, receive a word from the Lord and put it, firstly, put it into our own timing, which we all do. It's a very human thing to do, but we tend to put it into our own timing. And secondly, we think in blocks of time according to the calendar. So when somebody gives a word for, whatever, for a year, particular year, good morning, special Sunette. When somebody gives a word for a particular year, when somebody gives a word for a particular month, or whatever the case may be, our human brain, because we're very linear and very influenced by the Greek way of thinking because of our education, we immediately put like a block of time. And then we kind of said, okay, it has to be in this particular time. But that's not how God works. God knows our calendar, and he knows the Hebrew calendar. Good morning, Anthea. Good morning. I am feeling much better. Thank you, Evan. I am feeling a lot better. A little way to go, but I am feeling a lot better. So God is outside of time. Our time doesn't affect God, and that's why often we worry, that God is not going to be on time, but he isn't concerned about our time, because he is outside of time and he sees a bigger picture, as we've said so often. But he does work to a degree with us because he understands how our calendar works and how the Hebrew calendar works. And just also to bear in mind, and I've said this before, but I want to just remind us again and say this again. No calendar, not our Gregorian calendar, not even the Hebrew calendar that we follow, is actually 100% accurate. Days and dates and times and calendars have been changed over the years, and people, have come into power, and then good morning, magnificent Monica, lovely to have you on the live, my friend, and then instituted new calendars, and over the time, over centuries, good morning, Tilly, the actual timings, the original timings, have been lost. So even the Hebrew calendar that we follow today, in terms of 5784, the year that we're in, nobody can tell you that is 100% accurate, because it isn't 100% accurate. Nobody's there are people who say that we're not, it's the year isn't 5784. There is, so what I'm trying to get across here, and I feel like I'm not communicating this very well, what I'm trying to get across here is that we are not bound. We don't. So when I speak to you about the prophetic promises for Adar and the things that God has laid on my heart for this month, there is in God has this calendar that he put into place, and because it's his calendar, there is a prophetic flow to the calendar. There is a prophetic flow to the cycles of the Hebrew calendar. There is a prophetic flow to what we pay attention to at specific points in time on the Hebrew calendar. And God uses that calendar to speak to us about where we are. And there are things, if you go back and you look at the history of Israel and you look at things that happened on the Hebrew calendar, you will see that there are things that happened to Israel at the same times and almost the same dates, over and over and over again. And then when you study all of that, you get to understand the prophetic cycle of the Hebrew calendar. And even for myself, because I've been following the Hebrew calendar and teaching on it for years now, probably, 4 or 5 years now, I can see the prophetic flow of the way in my own life and in the lives of people around me. I can see the prophetic flow of the Hebrew calendar and how that outworks itself in our lives. So it is not something, good morning, Tanya, welcome this morning, my friend. It is not something, and I've said this so many times, we need to be very careful not to get religious about it in such a way that we move from being under one law, or one kind of legalism avenue or structure to another legalistic avenue or structure. Good morning, Elisma, welcome. We need to we need to be very careful of, and that's why I constantly say to people, constantly say to you on this platform, that however God convicts you or however he encourages you to follow the Hebrew calendar or celebrate the Hebrew feasts or whatever, you need to do that to the how much or how little God convicts you to do that. You know, some people are fully into the Hebrew calendar and all the feasts and all of that sort of thing, and I have no issue with that. And some people, they just want to understand the prophetic cycle. They don't necessarily want to be, you know, following all the feasts and doing all the things, and I completely understand that as well. And, you know, we don't stand in judgment of either one of those camps. If you someone who diligently follows the calendar, diligently pays attention to the feasts, diligently does all of that, that is amazing. And if you're someone who just wants to know what's happening, but you're not necessarily going to go and do all the things, that's also fine. That's also amazing. My main concern is that we pay attention to the prophetic cycle of the years, and that we hear God's voice in terms of those prophetic cycles, and that we understand what the feasts and things like that mean, that they are not, you know, they didn't just because we decided or Gentiles decided to change the calendar. God just didn't just do away with all of that. He wasn't just like, oh, okay, well, we won't worry with that anymore. Those were his times and seasons that he put in place. But so that is my main concern. But my other main concern is that we are all breaking free, all of us, to one degree or another. We are all breaking free in this era of the church from idolatrous religious structures, man-made religious structures, man-made religious laws. We are all breaking free to one degree or another from that, and looking for the freedom that comes through Christ and what God says and what Jesus says, rather than what man-made structures have told us over the years. And I don't want anybody to swap, you know, to step into liberation from idolatrous religious structures in the church, and then to cross over or swap or step into, you know, the religious legalism of Judaism, or the idolatrous religious structures that are also associated with Judaism. So I don't want that to happen. There's absolutely no need to get all legalistic about these things. There's no need to, it's you follow the Hebrew calendar, you follow the feasts, you follow the things to the greater or lesser degree that the Holy Spirit convicts you to do so. And that is absolutely between you and the Lord, and nothing to do with anybody else. So that I just wanted to explain that, because I don't ever want anybody to land up feeling condemned or convicted, or not convicted. I don't want anyone to feel condemned, because they didn't pay attention at sunset on Friday to the fact that we crossed over into the month of Adar. Honestly, that is, you need to follow that as much as, but there is a prophetic significance to the cycle of the Hebrew months and the way God intended them to be. There is a prophetic significance, and that prophetic significance needs to be received and then taken with us, because we also don't just, at the end of the month, it doesn't just, okay, we don't have to pay attention to that anymore. I've spoken to you before about transitioning from one month into the next month, where you don't just leave whatever you learned and whatever you received in the previous month and then sort of, move on to, you take that all with you, all the goodness, everything that God has showed you and taught you, and all of those things in the previous months, you take them with you into the next months, because, God doesn't say, okay, this is for now, and on the last day of this month it just ends off. No, he wants you to take the lessons that you've learned, take the conversations you've had with him into the month, and then as the Hebrew calendar continues in its cycles, you actually, if you look at it that way, as the Hebrew calendar continues in its cycles, you're actually ascending, because every Hebrew year, every time we go through these prophetic cycles, every time I teach on these prophetic things, there is a depth, another layer added, a new depth to it, a new understanding of it, because of where you are in your spiritual walk. And so, sometimes we think of ascending when we pay attention to that verse that says in Revelation, that says, come up higher and let me show you, the things to come. And we know that we are in a season where the church is being called to come up higher. We as individuals are being called to come up higher, to see things from a more spiritual plane, from a more spiritual perspective, rather than an earthly, natural perspective, so that we can see God's bigger picture. And sometimes we think that that come up higher is needs to be like a kind of almost like the launching of a rocket into space, come up higher like that, because that's what happened to John. John, the voice said come up higher, and John was in the spirit, and he went up higher. So, and that is definitely what is meant there, and that is definitely one way that God does it, where you just go up higher. But I think we don't pay enough attention to the fact that as we learn and as we grow and as we move through God's prophetic cycles, and it's like going around a mountain, but every time you go around the mountain, you're higher than you were the last time. Some of us feel like we go around the same mountain over and over again, but every time you go around that mountain, you don't end at the same place you were. You're ascending. You're coming up higher. You're coming up higher bit by bit and step by step. And sometimes in our spiritual walk and in our spiritual life with God, it's an instantaneous come up higher. It's just an instant and you're up there. And sometimes it's a slower process. As you go around the mountain, you ascend and you ascend and you ascend, but you don't stay in the same place that you were, because you're constantly learning and you're constantly growing and you're constantly paying attention. So it's like healing. Sometimes God moves miraculously and instantaneously, and the healing is heaven touches earth and the healing comes and it's done. And sometimes it's a slow process. Sometimes God uses the medical fraternity to bring your healing. Sometimes it's a slower process, and we are very much people who prefer the instant gratification kind of things. We prefer the instant, the instant healing, the instant going up higher, the instant, but not a lot of our walk with God is like that. So we need to and that's also because God isn't in a rush. He's not in a hurry, in terms of he is outside of time, and he waits for us to reach a certain point and to learn certain things. And if it takes a little bit longer, then he knows how long it's going to take. So I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. I just want you to sometimes I feel as though people come and they watch like one of these teachings or one of my lives, and they get very excited about the things that I say, which is amazing. But it's also it's those of you who have been journeying with me and have been following me and have been listening to my teachings, some of you for years, some of you since I started in 2020, that that can see, hopefully you can see, right from the beginning, the thread and how God has taken us higher, how none of us are in the same place that we were back then. And so it just is, it's a very, I think, a very hopeful way to look at it. Sometimes we have to look back to see how far we've come. Often for most of us, we're so focused on how far we still need to go and what we still need to learn, and how, and we feel so daunted by feeling how far we still need to go. And yet we don't take a look back and see how far we've come, how far up the mountain we actually are. And it's important. It's important to recognize how far up the mountain we are and how far we've actually come, and that we're not in the same place. So I wanted to just speak about all of that, because what I want to teach on this morning about Adar is two very important things that I feel is under attack, and that's why I'm emphasizing the times and the seasons and the timing and the seasons, because two things that you will find attacked in these two, and remember, it's a double portion, so it's a double portion of blessing and a double portion of everything good that God has for us, and we're not receiving a double portion of attack. We definitely aren't receiving that, but it is two things that are very significant about the month of Adar: our identity and timing. And so the month of Adar is a time, and this is we have a double portion of this, remember, this year. The month of Adar is a time to establish and attempt, with the help of the Holy Spirit, to fully grasp your identity in the spiritual realm. And I've been banging this particular drum for a while now, where we are far too conscious of what is happening in the natural and not conscious enough of what is happening in the spiritual. We are very conscious of our identity in the natural, our physical identity as in what we look like, our spiritual identity as in, what are my gifts and callings, our titles, our all of those things that are important in the natural, So even within the church, or particularly within the church, often we get so caught up in our identity in the natural. But it tells us in the Bible that the spiritual should be more tangible to you. The spiritual realm, the spiritual kingdom should be more tangible to you than the natural. It should be more tangible to you than the natural. And I've been speaking for ages now about how we need to we're building for eternity. We're building kingdom. We're not building on earth. We're not building anything natural. We need to be focused on, or we need to be conscious of, or we need to know that what we're building is for the kingdom, that what we're building is for eternity, that it has an eternal legacy, it has an eternal footprint, not just a natural footprint, not just a natural, this world that is so very real to us is, for us as human beings, over in the blink of an eye. And we step into eternity, and then we're going to be wondering what it was that we've been building all of our lives on earth. We need to be focused on building for the kingdom. We need to be focused on building for eternity. And how do we do that if we don't understand our identity in the spiritual realm? We need to, and it's more than just knowing your gifts and your callings. For many of us, that's often the easiest thing to identify, is what you're called to, or what giftings you walk in. It's knowing who you are in the Spirit, your authority in the Spirit, how far you are up that mountain in the Spirit. And this, for example, Adar 1 is not the month that we celebrate Purim or the Feast of Esther. It will happen in Adar 2, because it has to be connected to Passover, and they have to be closer together. So the Jewish people put the Feast of Esther into Adar 2. But if you think about even just the story of Esther and being born for such a time as this, if you have been born for such a time as this, which you have been, every single one of us was born for such a time as this, then God has given you a spiritual identity that is able to deal with and walk through the times that we are in. I think many of us look at the world around us, particularly those of us who weren't born into this world, who were born 50 plus years ago. And we think, we immediately think of, easier times and better times, the good old days. As human beings, we love to talk about the good old days, when things were less complicated and, this and that and the next thing. And some of us wonder whether, why were we born during this time? Like, Lord, why would I be born during this time? I wish I'd lived, at a different time. But you were born for such a time as this. God ordained that you would be on the earth at this time. He knew before the foundations of the earth were even formed that there would be an Elisma, that there would be an Anthea, that there would be a Sylvia on the earth for such a time as this. So if you feel those things in the natural, then you need to ask God for revelation of your spiritual identity, because you were put on the earth for such a time as this, not just to go through your life from one day into the next until it's time to step into eternity. So it's the month of Adar is a time to fully grasp and identify your identity in the spiritual realm, and be focused on that, and then you take that with you into the rest of the year, because it's also a month where you need to develop wartime strategies. You need to develop wartime strategies, particularly against the Antichrist spirit. Now, that sounds very, for many people, I think, then people are immediately like, oh my goodness, no, this is not for me. But it's for all of us, because, we tend to read Revelation, the book of Revelation, and we read about this Antichrist and all of this, and we tend to think that he's just going to appear right at the end. But that isn't. We need to see even scripture as more cyclical. And I've told you this so many times before, that, the Greek way of seeing things is very linear. First this, then that, then that, then that. That's why we are raised to be like step-by-step people. That's why we always, we want God to give us a formula for everything, because that is how we taught, that's how we educated, that is how our brain is taught to work. Very linear, one step after the other. And we read the book of Revelation like that. Like, this is going to happen, and then that is going to happen, and then that is going to happen. And there is a degree of that in there. There is a degree of that in there. But that was not the Hebraic way of thinking. The Hebraic way of thinking was much more cyclical. Much more cyclical. And we need to see things like that as cycles rather than one step after the other. And so the Antichrist spirit has been on the earth. It's not something new. The Antichrist spirit, you see the Antichrist spirit rising up when Jesus was crucified. You know the Antichrist spirit rising up when Hitler was in power. That you can identify the Antichrist spirit in various stages where it came more to the forefront over the years, over centuries, but it's always around, and because it's Antichrist. So it is Antichrist. Anything that is, Antichrist and the Jewish people there is an Antichrist spirit attached to it. It might not be the only thing that's driving it, but there is an Antichrist spirit. And we have to develop wartime strategies to deal with that, to deal with many things, but particularly the Antichrist spirit as we watch and we see it rising on the earth. Not rising for the first time, but gaining more power and getting more now. Not more power than God, not ever. But we need to be wise, and we need to have wartime strategies. I've said before that this month is the month of the month of Adar is the month associated with Naphtali, the tribe of Naphtali, and Naphtali made up the rear guard. When the Israelites were marching through the wilderness, Naphtali made up the rear. The tribe of Naphtali made up the rear guard. They were the ones that came up behind. And Barak, you remember the story of Deborah and Barak? Barak was from the tribe of Naphtali. And wartime strategies. And what did Barak do? Barak and Deborah together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, defeated the uprising of the Antichrist spirit at that time. So it's very important. Now, we're not necessarily getting on horses and going off to war in that, but it's time to develop war strategies, and you have to develop that with God. But as important as that is the month of Adar is a time to make sure that you're aligned with God's timing. So remember that this is the end of a biblical year, and we cross over into a new biblical year when we cross over into the month of Nisan. So we have Adar 1, Adar 2, and then the month of Nisan. And as we cross over from Adar 2 into the month of Nisan, we will step into a new biblical year. And every time you cross any kind of threshold that you are conscious of, a spiritual threshold into any sort of new year, for example, because that's what we're talking about right now, you need to be sure that you are aligned with the timings of God. Because what is particularly significant about the Antichrist spirit and the enemy, definitely, is if the enemy cannot get you, he cannot tempt you into, enormous sin. You walk in intimacy with Jesus. The things that you walk in, he cannot tempt you into enormous sin. He's going to try he doesn't just go, okay, well, I can't tempt them into sin, so I'm just going to leave them alone now. He doesn't do that. He just looks for other ways so he tries to distract you. We've spoken about that numerous times, where he tries to convince you to do something that is good, but not necessarily God. And then the other way that he tries to get to you is to get you out of the timing of the Lord. I've heard so many stories about people who got incredible words, prophetic words over their lives to go and do X, Y, or Z. And people who love Jesus and they, want to do what he wants them to do. And so they've rushed out and did or went after that prophetic word, and it wasn't the right timing, and it fell flat, or it went wrong, or whatever the case may be, because they didn't stop to ask God about his timing. Is this for now? Is this for now? And often, particularly if you receive a word from a prophet, prophets are very much, everything comes with a sense of urgency. Everything, I'm exactly the same as a prophet. Everything has a sense of urgency. Everything feels like it needs to happen now. And then, and often that's what we put across when we bring words, and you'll often hear a prophet say, this is a now word. Well, when you hear a prophet say, this is a now word, you can give it like a 2-year. A now word for a prophet often comes with like a 2-year timing. What feels like now for us as prophets is, because we live ahead, is often not now for the people that we're prophesying over, because it needs to be in God's timing. So in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, let's start from verse 20. Daniel answers, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. That's Daniel chapter 2, verse 20 to 22, where Daniel says it is God who changes the times and the seasons. And it is God who reveals things, who reveals the mysteries. He gives wisdom and he gives knowledge. And it is God who removes kings and sets up kings. And that is something to pay attention to in this year, where I've told you this before, over 60 nations are holding elections this year. It is a record year for elections. And so it is a time not just for us to figure out our own spiritual identity, but the spiritual identity of our nation. Because we need to be decreeing and declaring that. And we need to be standing on this verse that God removes kings and God sets up kings. And we need to be praying that God will remove the corrupt, evil kings in various different nations in the world, and you know what I mean by kings, I mean leaders, and that God will put in place the kings and the leaders that he wants to put in place. And as a prophetic people, we can pray that. We can stand in the gap. We need to be the watchman on the wall. As I've said before, we cannot be sleeping. And we need to be able to speak that out over ourselves and over our nation. Because then in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, Daniel says, and he, not God, the enemy, shall speak words against the Most High God, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the time of sacred feasts and holy days and the law. And the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, 2 times, and half a time. But so the Antichrist spirit is the one thing that it tries to do. The one thing that the enemy tries to do is change the times and the seasons. Change the times and the seasons, because it says clearly that God is the only one who can change times and seasons. And so the enemy tries to do the same thing. And again, don't think once, just one time. If we look through history and we look at, all the different things that have happened, and we look at it from a more cyclical perspective rather than a linear perspective, we can see the times that he has tried to do that. And so, and the changing of the times and the seasons, and when we're not aligned with God's timing, that is wearing, that wears us out. Because we don't understand why things aren't working out, and it wears us out because we're not in God's timing. And it's not some big secret mystery. It's not something that God, holds back until you super spiritual or something like that. It's something he wants us to know. Sometimes it's just a case of just asking the question. Lord, I want to be aligned with your timing. And everything I do, I want it to be aligned with your timing. And so we need to make sure that we are aligned with God's timing. And one of the ways to do that is to understand God's calendar and his prophetic cycles. One of the ways to do that is to understand God's calendar and his prophetic cycles. So the Hebrew letter associated with the month of Adar, the Hebrew letter associated with the months of Adar is Kaf. It's spelled Q-O-F or K-U-F, and it's the Q, like our Q for queen, but it's more of a K sound, like K for king. And the pictograph, so remember the Hebrew language was pictographic to start with. It was like hieroglyphics or that kind of thing. It started off as a pictures. Each letter has a picture, and each letter has a numeric value attached to it. And this is the pictograph for Kaf. Can you see that? So this is what the letter Kaf looks like as a pictograph, as in the original Hebrew language. And this is basically a sun. It was interpreted as a sun with a horizon going through it. a sun with the horizon going through it. And so this pictograph, that was how the ancient people saw it, a sun with the horizon going through it. And so one of the things, there are a few things that it meant for them, but one of the things why it looked like that was because it was referring to God separating light from darkness, separating the night from the day, separating the times and the seasons. So it was seen to represent dividing time. Because the way the Jewish people saw it was that in Genesis, when God created everything and he put all those different things in place, he divided time. And then when Jesus came, Jesus divided time again. Because we have what? BC and AD. And yes, there's a whole thing on the earth right now, to change that, to call those BC and AD, to call them something different for all the people who don't believe in Jesus, which is what? A rise of the Antichrist spirit. And the enemy wanting to change the times and the seasons. But God is the one who divides time. And when Jesus came the first time, he divided time. And then when he comes again, he will divide time again. So it is very important to be in God's timing and to know that we are in God's timing. It also, the antithesis of that for some of us is that we don't move because we're waiting for the perfect timing. No, you need to have a balance. You need to have a plumb line. God wants us to keep moving forward. And often I say to people, go until God says no. Go until God says no. But if you're making enormous decisions like moving, house, or moving countries, or, starting ministries, or whatever the case may be, then it is important to ask God for an indication of his timing. Is this for now, Lord? Particularly if you get given, an enormous word, then that makes it even more important to find out the timings of the Lord. And not just rely on your own wisdom and understanding, but ask God for wisdom and understanding and ask him for his timing. I want to just read to you from, just also, Jesus was born in the territory of Naphtali. So if you read Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1, it says, but in the midst of judgment there is the promise. And I think we can so receive that for ourselves right now and for the nations of the earth. But in the midst of judgment, there is the promise and the certainty of the Lord's deliverance. And there shall be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, the Lord brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he will make it glorious by the way of the Sea of Galilee, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. And who came from Galilee? Jesus. And Isaiah verse 9 goes on to say the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. So God is talking about how he actually had judgment on Zebulun and Naphtali, the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali and their land. But there is even in the midst of judgment, there is the promise and the certainty of the Lord's deliverance. And how even though there was judgment on Zebulun and Naphtali, eventually that is where Jesus came from. Jesus came from the land of Naphtali. He was born, he came out of the land of Naphtali. And that is an enormous promise that was then fulfilled. And Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. Another verse to decree and declare over our nations as we all enter into elections. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father of Eternity, Prince of Peace. So to remember that, to just remember that and pay attention to that in the midst of where we are right now. And then lastly, because I'm now running out of time, I wanted to just read to you from Psalm 119. So those you might know, because I have said this before, but Psalm 119, the Psalms are absolutely incredible. Hebrew writing is just incredible. Psalm 119 is written as an acrostic, which means that it's written using every letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Each new stanza, poetic stanza, David used another letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so the whole of Psalm 119 follows through the Hebrew alphabet. There's one letter of the Hebrew alphabet, I can't remember now which one it is, that doesn't feature in Psalm 119 because it's associated with evil. But every other letter of the Hebrew alphabet is represented in order in Psalm 119, obviously if you read it in Hebrew, not if you read it in English, if you read it in Hebrew. So every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, bar one, is represented in Psalm 119. And I want to read to you the passage that is associated with the letter Kaf, which is the Hebrew letter associated with Adar. So it is Psalm 119, verse 145 to 152. And I want you to just receive this as you listen to this. I'm reading from the Amplified. I cried with my whole heart, hear me, O Lord, I will keep your statutes. I will hear, receive, love, and obey them. I cried to you, save me, that I may keep your testimonies, hearing, receiving, loving, and obeying them. I anticipated the dawning of the morning, awaken the dawn, and cried in childlike prayer, I hoped in your word. My eyes anticipate the night watches, and I am awake before the cry of the watchman, that I may meditate on your word. Hear my voice according to your steadfast love, O Lord. Quicken me and give me life according to your righteous decrees. They draw near who follow after wrong thinking and persecute me with wickedness. They are far from your law. You are near, O Lord, nearer to me than my foes, and all your commandments are truth. Of old have I known your testimonies, and for a long time. Therefore it is a thoroughly established conviction that you have founded them forever. That is the portion of Psalm 119 associated with the Hebrew letter Kaf that is associated with the month of Adar. And I just think it is so pertinent for where we are. It is so pertinent in terms of everything we've been speaking about, the watchman on the wall needing to be awake, the awakening the dawn, Jeremiah 6, finding the eternal paths, sounding the trumpet, all of that sort of thing. So pertinent for where we are right now. So I encourage you to meditate on that, to meditate on Psalm 119, verse 145 to 152. Ask the Lord to confirm that you are aligned with his timings, and ask him also for any wartime strategies that you need for such a time as this. To be born for such a time as this. You know, we think of wartime strategies, battle plans, things like that. Esther's wartime strategy was that she went into the house of the king. She didn't say she was Jewish. She had a strategy. Mordecai gave her a strategy to follow. And she was born for such a time as that. In the same way, we are born for such a time as this. So when you find your wartime strategy from the Lord, it doesn't necessarily look like the way we imagine war. It just looks like a strategy for the days ahead. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm going to bless you with that. And I hope that this morning was resonated with you, and that it was good and insightful and informative and all the things, and that God really spoke. And I bless you with that Psalm 119, verse 145 to 152. And that you will experience more and more of God as you ascend up his mountain. In Jesus' name, amen. I shall see you on Wednesday at 7 a.m. for Wisdom Wednesdays. Love you all. Bye.